I always knew my sister was the favorite, but I didn't think she'd ever go this far. The night it happened, I was in my room, just trying to stay out of the way like I usually did, when I heard my mom yelling my name. Not calling, yelling. When I walked into the living room, everyone was already there, my dad, my mom, and my sister. She was standing slightly behind them, arms crossed, completely calm like she had been waiting for me. And then she looked right at me and said, "I think she took it." Just like that. No hesitation, no doubt, nothing. And my parents didn't question it. They didn't ask me what happened, didn't ask where I had been, they just looked at me like it was already decided. Within minutes, they were going through my things. My drawers, my closet, everything. I kept telling them I didn't take anything, but it didn't matter, no one was listening. Then my dad picked up his phone. And when I realized who he was calling, that's when it really hit me. They weren't just blaming me, they were ready to prove it. So when the police showed up and started searching my room, that's when everything completely fell apart. Because what they found was something I had never seen before in my life. My name is Lily. I'm 24 now, and for most of my life, I thought I just had one of those families where things weren't exactly equal, but not bad enough to question. My sister, Emma, is 2 years older than me, and growing up, she was always the one everything seemed to revolve around. From the outside, though, we looked completely normal. My dad worked long hours, my mom handled everything at home, and we lived in a quiet neighborhood where nothing really stood out. If you asked anyone, they would have said we were a good family. And in some ways, we were. It just didn't feel that way to me. Emma was the kind of person people liked instantly. She knew how to talk to adults, how to smile at the right time, how to say things in a way that made her sound thoughtful even when she wasn't. My parents loved that about her. They used words like mature, responsible, easy to raise. With me, they didn't use those words. I was the one they described as sensitive, or difficult, or sometimes just too much. And it wasn't like they said it all the time, it was just there in small moments repeated over years. Like the way my mom would double-check anything I told her. If I said I finished my homework, she'd ask to see it. If I said I was going out with friends, she'd ask who, where, when, every detail. Emma never got those questions. If she said something, that was enough. I remember noticing that even as a kid, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I just assumed she had earned their trust, and I hadn't yet. So I tried. I really did. I kept my grades up, stayed out of trouble, helped around the house whenever I could. I thought if I just did everything right long enough, eventually things would feel balanced. But it never really worked that way. Because no matter what I did, there was always this feeling that I was being watched a little more closely, judged a little more quickly. And Emma wasn't. I remember one afternoon when we were both in the kitchen. Emma dropped a glass. It slipped right out of her hand and shattered all over the floor. She just stood there for a second, then laughed and said, "Oops." My mom came in, looked at the mess, and just sighed softly. She told her to step back so she wouldn't get hurt, grabbed a towel, and cleaned it up herself. There was no anger, no lecture, nothing. A few days later, I knocked over a cup of water. It wasn't even glass, nothing broke, it barely spread across the counter. But somehow, that turned into a conversation. Not loud, not aggressive, but long. About being more careful. About thinking before I moved. About how small mistakes add up. I remember standing there thinking it's just water. But I didn't say that. Because by then, I had already learned that explaining things didn't really help. It just made it worse. So I started adjusting without even realizing it. I spoke less. I checked things twice. I tried to stay ahead of any situation that could turn into a problem. And for a while, it seemed like that was enough to keep things calm. At least on the surface. But there were other things too, smaller moments that didn't stand out on their own, but felt different when you added them up. Like how Emma could come home late and just say traffic was bad, and that would be the end of it. If I came home even a little late, there were questions waiting for me before I even got through the door. Or how Emma could interrupt conversations, correct people, even raise her voice sometimes, and it would get brushed off as her being passionate. If I did the same thing, it was disrespectful. At the time, I didn't think of it as unfair. I just thought, maybe this is how families work. Maybe one person is just easier. So I stopped comparing. Or, at least, I tried to. Because the truth is, even when you don't say it out loud, you notice. You notice who gets believed first. You notice who gets the benefit of the doubt. You notice who doesn't have to explain themselves. And over time, you start to understand your place in all of it. I wasn't the problem, but I also wasn't the priority. And for a long time, I convinced myself that was okay. Because nothing had ever happened that I couldn't explain away. Nothing big enough to make me question everything. Until that night. Because looking back now, I can see something I didn't understand then. It was never really about what I did. And it wasn't about what Emma did either. It was about what my parents had already decided to believe, long before anything actually happened. At the time, I told myself it was just favoritism, nothing more. But after what happened that night, I started to wonder, was it really just favoritism? Or had something else been happening the entire time? The thing that went missing that night was money. Not a small amount either. My dad kept a few $100s in an envelope in his drawer, something he didn't usually talk about, something I didn't even know existed until that moment. I only found out because of the way my mom said it. Her voice wasn't confused. It wasn't questioning. It sounded certain. By the time I walked into the living room, the atmosphere already felt different, like something had already been decided before I got there. My dad was standing near the hallway, my mom had the empty envelope in her hand, and Emma was standing a little behind them, quiet. No one asked me anything right away. They just looked at me. That silence lasted a few seconds too long. Then my mom asked if I had seen the money. I said no. It was a simple answer, the only answer I had. But it didn't seem to land. Before I could even ask what was going on, Emma spoke. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She just said it calmly. I think she took it. For a second, I honestly thought I misheard her. It didn't make sense. I looked at her, expecting her to explain, or at least show some uncertainty. But she didn't. She held my gaze just long enough for it to feel intentional, then looked away like what she said didn't need anything else. That was the part that stayed with me. Not just the accusation, but how easy it was for her. My parents didn't question her. There was no follow-up, no asking why she thought that, no attempt to understand what actually happened. They just turned their attention back to me. And suddenly, everything shifted. I started explaining, telling them I hadn't taken anything, that I didn't even know about the money, that I hadn't been in their room. But it felt like my words weren't reaching them, like I was speaking after the conclusion had already been made. My dad told me to go to my room, not loudly, just firm, controlled, like this was a step in a process he had already decided on. That's when they started searching. At first, I thought it was just to scare me. Maybe they expected me to panic and admit something. But it didn't stop. They went through everything. Drawers, bags, shelves, places that didn't even make sense to check. I sat there watching them, trying to understand how this had escalated so quickly. I kept repeating that I didn't take anything. No one responded, not even to acknowledge that I was speaking. And Emma stayed quiet the entire time. That silence started to feel heavier than anything she had said. She didn't step in, didn't try to clarify, didn't even pretend to reconsider. She just stood there. And the more I watched her, the more something about it felt off. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't panic. It was control. She avoided looking at me completely. Every time I tried to catch her eye, she would shift her attention somewhere else, like she had already decided there was nothing left to say. At the time, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe she really thought I had taken it. Maybe she was just uncomfortable. That's what I told myself. But something didn't sit right. Because if she truly believed it, wouldn't she want to say more? Wouldn't she ask questions? Wouldn't she react in some way? Instead, she stayed calm. Too calm. And my parents didn't seem to notice. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to look at it too closely. After a while, my dad stepped out of the room. I didn't hear the full conversation, but I heard enough. His tone was serious, measured. And then I heard the words that made everything feel different. He was calling the police. That was the moment everything shifted. Up until then, it felt like something contained, something that could still be resolved inside the house. But once that call was made, this became something else. Something official. Something that wouldn't just disappear. I remember sitting on my bed, trying to go back through everything in my head, trying to find any explanation that made sense. But there wasn't one. The only thing that stood out was Emma. The way she said it. The way she stayed calm. The way she avoided me completely. And for the first time, a thought came up that I couldn't push away. What if she knew more than she was saying? That thought didn't fully form yet, but it stayed there. And the more I sat with it, the harder it became to ignore. Because this didn't feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It didn't even feel like a wrong assumption. It felt like something had been set in motion. And I wasn't just being blamed. I was being placed. That was the first moment I stopped trying to explain myself and started wondering, why did she say it so easily? That night didn't end when the police arrived. If anything, that's when everything became harder to ignore. They searched my room, asked questions, wrote things down, and even though I kept repeating the same answer, it didn't seem to change anything. I didn't take the money, but that didn't matter in that moment. Because once something like that starts, it carries its own weight. And I could feel it, not just in the room, but in the way everyone was acting. My parents weren't angry anymore. They were focused, like they were trying to handle a situation, not question it. And Emma stayed exactly the same. Quiet, composed, distant. That word stayed with me. Distant. Because it wasn't just that she wasn't helping. It was that she seemed removed from the situation completely, like she wasn't part of it at all, like she had already done her part. That feeling didn't go away after that night. If anything, it followed me. The next morning, everything felt different. Not openly tense, just settled in a way that didn't feel right. My mom avoided eye contact. My dad barely spoke to me. And Emma acted like nothing had happened. That was the part that started to bother me the most. Because I couldn't understand how she could move on that easily. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The way she said it. I think she took it. Simple. Direct. Certain. And the more I thought about it, the more familiar it started to feel. Not that exact moment, but the pattern behind it. There had been other situations before. Smaller ones. Things I hadn't really paid attention to at the time. But now they started coming back. One by one, like pieces I hadn't connected before. I remembered a time in school when a teacher called home about a missing assignment. Emma told them I had distracted her and made her forget. I hadn't even been near her that day. But somehow, the conversation turned into me needing to be more responsible. Another time, something went missing from the kitchen. Not money, just something small. And again, it somehow circled back to me. Not directly, but enough. Enough to make me explain myself. At the time, I brushed those things off. They didn't seem important. They didn't feel connected. But now, they did. Because the structure was always the same. Something goes wrong. Emma speaks first. I get questioned. And then things move on. No resolution. No real discussion. Just a quiet conclusion that always seemed to land in the same place. On me. That realization didn't come all at once. It built slowly. Over hours. Over that entire day. Every time I thought about something, another memory followed. Another moment where things didn't quite add up. Another situation where I had accepted something without really understanding it. And the more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable it became. Because this wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't just misunderstanding. It was consistent. Too consistent. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. I started paying attention to details I would have ignored before. The way Emma spoke. The timing of things. The way my parents reacted without asking questions. And suddenly, everything felt more deliberate. More controlled. That word came back again. Control. Not obvious. Not loud. But there. In the background. Guiding things in a way I hadn't noticed before. I didn't have proof yet. I didn't even fully understand what I was looking at. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't random. And if it wasn't random, then it meant something else. Something intentional. That was the moment everything shifted for me. Not outwardly. Nothing changed in the house. But internally, I stopped seeing things the way I used to. I stopped assuming, stopped explaining things away, and started asking a different question. Not why this happened, but how long it had been happening. And once that question settled in, another one followed. If this had happened before, how many times had I missed it? Once I saw the pattern, something in me shifted. Not in a way anyone else could see. I didn't confront anyone, didn't change how I acted, didn't try to prove anything. If anything, I became easier to deal with. Quieter. More agreeable. Because the last thing I wanted was for anyone to realize I was paying attention now. I started noticing things in a different way. Not just what people said, but when they said it. Not just what happened, but what didn't happen. The gap started to matter more than the moments themselves. Emma moved through the house the same way she always had, but now I could see the control behind it. She never rushed, never reacted too quickly, never let herself look uncertain. If my parents asked her something, she answered just enough. Never too much, never too little. And they accepted it every time. That part stood out more than anything. Because with me, there were always follow-up questions. With her, there never were. I started paying attention to her phone more closely. Not in an obvious way, just small observations. She kept it face down most of the time. If it lit up, she checked it immediately. If someone walked in, she adjusted her position without even thinking about it. One night, I walked into the kitchen while she was texting. She didn't jump or hide it quickly. She just turned slightly, like it was second nature. That kind of habit doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from repetition. From knowing you don't want something to be seen. I didn't say anything. I just noticed it. A few days later, I started noticing something else. Timing. Emma would tell my parents she was going out for an hour, maybe two. But she would be gone longer. Sometimes much longer. And when she came back, there were no questions. Or, at least none that I could hear. If I came home 10 minutes later than I said, it was a discussion. With her, it was silence. That silence started to feel intentional. Like certain things weren't meant to be addressed openly. That's when I began paying attention to my parents more closely too. Not just to Emma, but to how they reacted around her. There were moments where they seemed careful, not strict, not controlling, careful. Like they were trying to keep something steady, instead of correcting it. One evening, I walked past their room again. The door was slightly open. I wasn't trying to listen. But once I heard my mom's voice, I stopped without meaning to. Just don't let it happen again. Her tone was low, controlled. Not angry, not surprised. Just firm in a quiet way. There was a short pause. Then Emma answered. It won't. That was it. No explanation. No questions. No follow-up. And that moment stayed with me longer than anything else. Because it didn't sound like something new. It sounded like something repeated. Something already understood between them. I kept walking like I didn't hear anything. But after that, I stopped doubting what I was seeing. Because that wasn't normal. That wasn't how you talk about a one-time mistake. That's how you talk about something ongoing. After that, everything started to feel more connected. Emma's calm behavior. My parents' silence. The way things were handled quickly, without discussion. It all fit together. And for the first time, I stopped asking if something was wrong. And started asking how long it had been wrong. I went back in my memory again. Not just recent things. Older moments. Things I had brushed off. Ignored. Explained away. And now they looked different. Clearer. More intentional. like I had been seeing pieces of something without realizing they were connected. And the more I thought about it, the more one idea kept coming back. Emma wasn't just being protected. She was being covered for. And my parents weren't just unaware. They were part of it. That realization didn't come with emotion. It came with clarity. Because once you understand something like that, there's no confusion left. No benefit of the doubt. No waiting for things to make sense. They already did. Just not in the way I had wanted them to. At that point, I stopped expecting fairness. Stopped expecting honesty. Stopped expecting anyone to correct what was happening. Because they weren't going to. They had already made their choice. The only thing I didn't fully understand yet was what exactly Emma had been hiding, and how far my parents were willing to go to protect it. Because if they were willing to call the police on me without hesitation, then whatever they were covering for had to be bigger than I thought. And that was the part one still didn't have the answer to.
Not yet.
By that point, I wasn't confused anymore. I didn't have every detail, but I had enough to stop questioning myself. And once that shift happens, you stop reacting. You start choosing what to do next. I didn't confront anyone right away. I waited. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew how things worked in that house. If I went in too early, it would turn into the same cycle. Questions turned into deflection. Deflection turned into blame. And somehow, it would land back on me again. So I stayed quiet. I kept observing, kept listening, kept letting things unfold without interfering. Because I needed something solid. Something that couldn't be twisted or dismissed. Something that would force the truth to stay where it was. A few days passed like that. Nothing changed on the surface. Emma acted the same. My parents acted the same. And if I didn't know what I knew, it would have looked normal again. But once you see something clearly, you can't go back to that. Every small detail started to feel sharper, more defined, more intentional. Then one afternoon something small happened. Emma left her phone on the kitchen counter. That almost never happened. She was always aware of where it was. Always. Even when she went to another room, it was usually with her. But that day, she walked away without it. At first, I didn't move. I just stood there looking at it. Not rushing. Not reacting, just thinking, because I knew what this moment meant. It wasn't just an opportunity. It was a decision. Once I picked it up, there was no going back to not knowing. For a few seconds, I almost walked away. Not out of fear, just hesitation. Because some things, once you see them, change everything.
But then I thought about that night.
The accusation. The police. The way no one had even paused to consider my side. And that hesitation disappeared. I picked up the phone, unlocked it, and opened her messages. I didn't scroll randomly. I didn't need to. I went straight to the most recent conversation. And within seconds, I saw enough. There were messages about money, not vague ones.
Specific amounts.
Specific days. Mentions of needing it quickly. Mentions of not wanting it to be noticed. And then I saw the line that made everything stop. I'll just say she took it again, they won't question it. I read it once. Then again. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed to make sure I wasn't misreading it. But I wasn't. It was clear. Direct.
Planned.
This wasn't the first time. That one sentence told me everything. I scrolled a little more. Not too much. Just enough to confirm what I already knew. There were other messages. Similar situations. Same solution. Blame me. Every time. That was the system. That was how it worked. And my parents. They knew. They had to know. Because this only works if no one questions it. I didn't stay there long. I took pictures. Clear ones. Focused on what mattered. Then I put the phone back exactly where it was. Same position. Same angle. Nothing out of place. And I walked away.
Calm. Steady.
Like nothing had happened. But internally, everything was settled now. Not emotional. Not overwhelming, just clear. That evening, I waited until everyone was in the same room. My dad was sitting in his usual chair.
My mom was nearby.
And Emma was there too, relaxed, like every other day, like nothing had ever happened. I walked in and stopped a few steps away. No one reacted at first. Then my mom looked at me and asked what I needed. Her tone was neutral, normal, like this was any other moment. And for a second, it almost felt like the old version of me would respond the same way. Explain something, ask something, try to keep things calm. But that version of me wasn't there anymore. I looked at Emma, not quickly, not aggressively, just directly. And I asked, "Do you want to say it again?" She frowned slightly, just enough to show she wasn't expecting that. "What are you talking about?" Her voice was steady, controlled, exactly like before. And that was the moment I understood something clearly. She thought this would go the same way it always had, that she could deny,
Stay calm.
let my parents step in, and it would shift away from her again. But this time, I didn't respond with words. I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and placed it on the table between us.
Slowly.
No rush, no emotion. I opened the images and turned the screen toward them. No explanation, no build-up, just the truth. My dad looked first, then my mom, and then Emma. The room went completely still, not tense, not loud, just silent, because there was nothing to argue with, nothing to redirect, nothing to question. It was all there, clear, undeniable. For the first time, Emma didn't respond immediately.
She didn't speak, didn't correct anything.
Didn't shift the focus. And that small pause, that break in her control,
Was enough.
my parents didn't say anything either. They just looked at the screen, then at her, and then nothing. No defense, no explanation, no turning it back on me. That was new, that silence. It meant everything had changed, because for the first time, I wasn't the easiest answer in the room anymore. And once that happened, there was only one question left. What were they going to do now that the truth was right in front of them? No one spoke for a while after that. It wasn't the kind of silence that feels tense or uncomfortable. It was the kind that settles in when there's nothing left to say. My dad was still looking at the phone like he was trying to process something he already understood. My mom sat back slightly, her expression unreadable, but different from before. And Emma,
She didn't look at me.
she didn't look at them either. For the first time, she looked unsure. Not panicked, not emotional, just without control. That was new. My dad was the first to move. He picked up the phone again, scrolled through the images slowly, then placed it back down exactly where it was. Then he looked at Emma. Not angry, not loud, just direct. "Is this true?" She didn't answer right away. And that hesitation said more than anything she could have said. Eventually she nodded. Just once. Small. Quiet. But enough. My mom closed her eyes for a second, like she had expected this, but still didn't want to face it fully. Then she said something that stayed with me longer than anything else. "We didn't want it to get this far. Not we didn't know.
Not this is a mistake. Just we didn't want it to get this far."
That was the moment everything became clear in a different way. They had known. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not every time. But enough. Enough to choose what they had been doing. My dad ran his hand over his face, then looked at me. And for the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not doubt. Not judgment. Something closer to realization. But it didn't feel like it mattered anymore. Because by that point, I wasn't waiting for that from him. Or from my mom. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't waiting for them to fix anything. That part of me had already let go. They started talking after that. Not to me. To Emma. Asking questions, trying to understand how long it had been happening, where the money went, what else they didn't know. And she answered. Not completely, but enough. Enough to confirm what I already understood. That this wasn't the first time, that it had been happening in smaller ways for a while. And every time, it had been easier to shift the focus than to deal with it directly. I stood there for a few more minutes, listening without really engaging, because none of it felt like it was for me. It felt like something they needed to sort out between themselves. Something that had been building long before I realized it. Eventually, my mom turned to me. Her tone was softer now. We were trying to protect her. That was the explanation. Simple, careful, and somehow it made everything feel even clearer. Because it wasn't about misunderstanding. It wasn't about confusion. It was a choice. They chose her. Even when it meant blaming me. Even when it meant calling the police. Even when it meant letting things go that shouldn't have been ignored. And once I understood that, there wasn't really anything left to argue about. I nodded. Not in agreement. Just in acknowledgement. Because I heard her. I just didn't accept it. That was the difference. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't point anything out. Didn't try to make them understand how it felt. Because at that point I didn't need them to understand. I already did. I turned, walked back to my room, and closed the door. Not dramatically. Just quietly. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt still. Not heavy. Not overwhelming. Just settled. Over the next few days, things in the house shifted. Not all at once. Not in obvious ways. Emma was quieter. My parents spoke more carefully. There were conversations happening behind closed doors. But I didn't try to listen anymore. I didn't need to. Because whatever they were working through, it wasn't mine to carry. I stopped explaining myself. Stopped trying to rebuild anything. Stopped looking for signs that things were going back to normal. Because I realized something important. Normal wasn't something I wanted anymore. A few weeks later, I started making changes. Small at first. Spending less time at home. Focusing more on my own plans. Creating space without making it a statement. And slowly, that space became permanent. I moved out not long after. It wasn't dramatic. No big conversation. No final argument. Just a quiet decision. And once I left, something in me felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I wasn't part of that system anymore. I didn't have to prove anything. Didn't have to explain anything. Didn't have to wait for someone to see me clearly. I could just be. I still think about that night sometimes. Not with anger. Not even with disappointment. Just with clarity. Because it showed me something I probably wouldn't have accepted otherwise. It showed me exactly where I stood. And once you see that clearly, you stop trying to change it. You just choose what to do next. For me, that meant stepping away. Not to punish anyone. Not to prove anything. Just to give myself something I didn't have before. Peace. And for the first time, I stopped trying to be enough for them. Microphone outro, 30 to 40 seconds. If you've ever felt like you were being blamed for things that didn't make sense, or like no matter what you did, it never really changed how people saw you, then you probably understand the story more than you think. Sometimes it's not about doing more or trying harder. Sometimes it's about recognizing what's already been decided around you and choosing yourself anyway. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. I read all of them. And if you want more stories like this, there are plenty more waiting for you right here.